touched on a good point there, you know, setting the culture, and I find that we do a lot of brand new buildings where we take them on from the first day that they become a units plan. And in the first year, the course that you set often becomes the path for the entire life of the building. So it's a really critical stage, this first 12 months at Coven, and the Archer as well. So excellent, well done. A bit about me. I'm Chris Miller. I'm the Managing Director of Vantage Strata. I have been in strata or sort of adjacent to the strata industry for about 15 years. I started my career many years ago in a company called Canberra Units Plan Services. Does anyone remember Cups? No? Anyway, Cups was then purchased by Ray White, and then slowly over time they rebranded and they are now Civium. So I was there as a strata manager. Would you believe I was doing a carpenter's apprenticeship? Because my dad's a carpenter and he was sick of me being a couch potato, so he made me go and work with him. And one day I went, wow, this is getting up at 6 in the morning and going and working outside. This is a mug's game. So I left that and I applied for every job that I could find back in the days when it was you'd apply in the newspaper. So circled all the jobs that were available. One for a body corporate manager. Had no idea what it was, and I got the job, and I probably didn't really know what it was for a good 2 or 3 months after I started. They gave me a desk and a phone and a copy of the Unit Titles Act, and they said, good luck. I had 98 properties that I managed, about 1,200 units. Yeah, and it was sink or swim. I ended up progressing through that company, and I was at one point sort of running the business for when it was Ray White Strata, and then I had a hiatus. I decided that if you were going to be in Strata and you were, if you didn't own the business, then it was just too hard of a job to do for someone else. And I had some problems with the company. I thought the business model was broken. How can you manage 98 buildings and have any meaningful knowledge of any of them, you know? So I was a bit frustrated, and I left and became a commercial real estate agent for a few years, and was enjoying that when my now business partners approached me and said, hey, we're going to start a strata company. Would you like to get back into strata? And I thought, I was having a bad day, and I thought, yeah, I'll do that. And here we are. That was about 4.5 years ago. So it's been quite a nervous and exciting journey. We've now got about 6,000 units that we manage across about 90 buildings thereabouts. I'm also the president of Strata Community Australia in the ACT, and have been an advocate for legislation reform. There you go, Robert, you can admire my article in the Strata magazine. I've been an advocate for legislation reform. We've got some real deficiencies here in the ACT in terms of how our legislation is crafted. It doesn't really respond to the mixed use environment. It doesn't that adequately...
How much is he paying you,
Yeah. Doesn't...
They arrived the other day and told you it's the centrefold, so I just...
That's right. No, funny, they're not... No one's taking any of them. I can't work out what's wrong. Yeah, so our legislation, there's some real barriers in the ACT. There's a real problem still, I think, in the business model and the level of education and professionalism from strata managers and from our clients. So it's one of the reasons that I conduct this course. So that's a little bit about me. About Vantage Strata, I'd be remiss if I didn't give ourselves a plug, since we're locally owned, commercially minded. We do strata management. So strata management, as we define it, is primarily the administrative component of strata, of what you see going on. So we deal with the finances, stakeholder engagement, application of the Act. It's largely a desk-bound role. So your strata manager, for, you know, if they work 8 hours a day, they probably work 12 hours a day. get in and are at their desk answering emails and preparing agendas and minutes and paying bills and doing that sort of thing. Facilities management, which we include as a core requirement of what we do. It's not an extra over and above, so we have a facilities manager here. They're primarily focused on awareness of building assets and their compliance and maintenance obligations, development of contract registers, implementation of asset registers and preventative maintenance schedules. So understanding the moving parts of the building, what needs to be looked after and how that should be looked after. Again, and it's facilities management is a poorly defined and poorly used term in the ACT. A lot of people think of facilities management, they think of people on the ground doing things, you know, fixing things. That's not what we think of when we talk about facilities management. We think of essentially another administrative component. It is running tender processes, it's writing scopes of works and keeping contracts registers and making sure that the way that we understand the building is adequately documented and followed. So then we have building management. This is the hands-on stuff. Who has a building manager at their building? You've got Ronnie?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Ronnie's pretty excellent, isn't he? Yeah, we love Ronnie too. You guys have got Kevy over there. Yeah. Yeah, so building managers are boots on the ground resources, and they're there for a set number of hours. I think Kevy's there for 19 hours a week from...
Yeah, I don't really know his time on the
Yeah.
site, but he's there all the time.
Oh, good. Well, he's allocated 19 hours a week, but we actually don't have another building for him to work at. So I think we've had him there. Yeah. We've had him there essentially full time until we fill up the rest of his time. Oh, he does St. Germain as well, actually, for a couple of hours a week.
So it's convenient for everyone then.
Yeah, exactly. It is, yeah. And
Norris is pretty good building manager.
yeah, pretty much. They've got a bit of a hybrid model where they sort of wrap it into the cleaning, but it seems to work out there. We work well with them. They've had...
Well, it's just not cleaning duties. I mean, just yesterday, one of the tenants rang him up because their electronic door lock wasn't working.
Yeah.
We'll go up there and try it, and he may ring me up and we go and have a look at it,
Exactly, yeah. And in a larger building, it's actually quite important to have that kind of service. So, it's the on-site supervisory, maintaining building appearance and quality, actively managing service contracts and enforcement of rules. So the building manager doesn't conduct the cleaning, but they should every day make sure that the cleaners are doing the job to the scope, and if they're not, then they're grabbing them by the collar and asking them why, or emailing their supervisor or site supervisor. So they're the distinctions. All right. The strata management industry is suffering from a critical reputation crisis. You wouldn't have known it? No?
I thought the construction industry, period, is suffering from a reputation crisis.
Well, the construction industry certainly is, and the strata, and it's funny that that strata has been totally invisible in terms of the property industry for a long time. Quite perplexingly, I can't quite understand how that's the case, but it has sort of not really, when you read the Fin Review and you hear about the real estate industry, you hear about real estate sales businesses, and property management is sort of the next tier, and strata is almost the ugly third cousin that no one talks about. And at the moment, we're going through a period where the spotlight is on us all of a sudden, and I think it's probably going to be the new normal. I don't think we're having a moment. I think from now on, people are talking about strata and strata managers and the services that they deliver. They're talking about apartments and defects and cladding and all of these things. It's really, really topical, but I don't think it's going anywhere. the reason that I think we are suffering a reputation crisis, there's a few different reasons. I think that the education standards in Strata are really, really poor. There's such a low barrier to entry that it has created an industry with people looking after everyone's homes and investments that don't really have a great deal of knowledge about what they're doing.
I think that's just not Strata management alone. I mean, it's any industry nowadays.
Yeah. Well, I think it's...
Including entry to Canberra Uni and things like that, which I actually do, and the entry, the level of maths and English of the students coming in is far less. The bar is far less than when I came in.
Yeah, well...
People that can't even work out the area of a rectangle.
Well, there you go. So it's pervasive across maybe all industries, but I think it's particularly pronounced in Strata so far as the real estate industry is concerned, because there's no requirement for anyone to do any mandatory education. So if you wanted to be a Strata manager, Robert, I could hire you tomorrow. You could be managing a portfolio of 98 buildings with a desk and a phone and a well-wishers.
Thanks,
Like a CIT?
Nothing.
Like that?
You can show up tomorrow and start managing a Strata business. You'd make an excellent Strata manager, by the way, Robin, if you ever feel so inclined. You should have a chat to me. To be the owner of a Strata management company, you must have a real estate license, right? And I have my real estate license. I got it a long time ago, which is a diploma level education requirement. Not that difficult, but at least enough to have put you through the ringer. However, there are two kinds of real estate licenses in the ACT. There's a license to be a full real estate agent, which is the license that I've got, the diploma level. Or if you want to just manage, just run a business that manages Strata, then you can get a particular kind of real estate license that just requires you to fill out a form, pay $500. A couple of days later, you'll get your license. So anyone in this room could start, probably at risk of creating competition for myself, anyone here could start a Strata company tomorrow by filling out a form, paying $500, and then go and populate that company with people who know just the same or less about Strata. Yeah, exactly. A co-op. Yeah, exactly. In the broader real estate industry, once you've got a license, you can employ people to work for you, and they require at least a registration to be a salesperson or a property manager. And once they've got that registration, they have to do what's called CPD, continuing professional development. Every year they've got to accumulate points so that they stay, up to speed with what's going on. None of that exists in Strata. It's manifestly inadequate. It's really, really bad. And I met with Minister Gentleman only a few weeks ago, where I raised again that we need to improve the professional standards of Strata. So there's a whole heap of knock-on effects to that. I'll be the first to admit, as a business owner, I'd like to say we've got the best Strata managers and everyone is fantastic, and I think we do have really good Strata managers. But the pool of people to hire from is pretty limited. I can't go out and get anyone with a PhD in Strata or much qualification other than they happen to work for another Strata management company for 5 years and have learned all of their bad habits. So there's some commercial barriers, or there have been some commercial barriers to improving standards. If you manage so for my business, I need a Strata manager to manage somewhere between 800 and 1,000 units before they're, it's commercially viable for that employee. And we hire Strata managers, we pay them more than the industry standard, but they're not making 250 grand. You're sort of starting salary of 70, 75,000 bucks. If you're senior, you might get to 80, 90,000 dollars. So for those numbers to stack up, roughly speaking, we measure things in the Strata industry by number of units. They need to manage about 800 to 1,000 units. Now, Canberra historically hasn't had really large buildings. So consequently, if the commercial model, and all of my competitors would have roughly similar numbers, they probably need their strata managers to manage somewhere around 1,000 units. If that's the case for everyone, then to get to 1,000 units, if you're managing buildings with an average size of 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 units, you've got to look after a lot of buildings before you can get to that point. When we started Vantage Strata, we made a conscious decision. We don't really want to look after 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 10 unit developments, simply because, not because they're worse or I don't like those kinds of buildings or there's anything wrong with them, but in order to get to 1,000 units, if you have to manage 60 buildings, you've lost the ability to have meaningful awareness and engagement with each building. So that led us to focus primarily on larger buildings. Who's your strata manager? Would be Sarah?
Sarah, yes.
Sarah manages more than 1,000 units. She manages 7 buildings.
Yeah.
So when I started at 1,000, close to 1,000 units, I had 98 buildings.
Lots and lots of small buildings.
Lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of small buildings.
Yeah.
Every building has an AGM. They might have a committee meeting or a couple of committee meetings a year. There's every building, even if it's 5 units, you know, it takes the same amount of time to pay the gardener every month and look at his invoice, whether his invoice is $200 or, you know, $20,000 a month. So that I sound like I'm giving ourselves a plug that we've got this particular business model, but that is the reality of the industry that we're in. Most buildings across the country, frankly, are, I think the average size of units per building is, you know, like 20 across the 2 million odd owners corporations.
That kind of workloads, Sarah pretty much responds to us within 24 hours.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's pretty quick.
Yeah, and Sarah's great. She's one of our best strata managers, has been with us for ages. When Sarah came to us from the previous company, she was looking after 50 plus buildings. So as much as I'd like to say, oh, we're better than others, the reality is that is the industry. There's no, you know, you can't escape. It's nice if you have a startup that you can choose to just look after larger buildings, but all of these buildings need to be managed. And if you want to get to a point where you say, well, actually a strata manager is only going to look after, you know, 10 buildings at 20 units average size, so they're only going to look after 200, unless people are prepared to pay $800, you know, per unit in strata management fees, something's going to give there. So we're victims of poor regulation and poor education standards, but we're also just a victim of those commercial realities. And that is why I think we've got some challenges and have had the challenges that we've had in the strata industry. I think it's getting better, and certainly the kinds of developments that we're seeing more often than not are large precinct style, campus style developments. So that needle is moving a bit, but there's a fair bit of work to be done. It's one of the reasons why I run this course, because I think if we can have our clients and our committees better aware, you know, better informed and better aware of their roles, then everyone's job becomes a bit easier. So, we'll get through that. This is boring. This is just talking ourselves up. All right, the industry by the numbers. I like to do this because I find it really interesting, frankly. In 2017, the University of New South Wales conducted the first really substantive analysis of the strata industry across Australia. Bizarrely, it was quite bizarre that no academic minds have considered strata before, and there was no real data, no real analysis. We know as an industry, because we share information, roughly the size of the industry, but there was no government you know, analysis or studies or university studies that really told us much of a picture, which is really, really quite strange, because when you look at the numbers, the strata industry is really huge, right? 9% of the country, of our entire population, live in a strata-titled building. So, you know, as of whenever they did this study, 2017, I'm pretty sure, 2016 census data, there were 2,200,000 apartment residents. I gave a speech last night at the SCA Awards, and I plagiarised the heck out of this because I find these numbers really interesting, right? So there's 316,000 schemes, owners, corporations, units, plans in the country, and 2.5 million lots or units, as we call them in the ACT. And this I find quite an interesting graph. There were 58% of those 316,000 schemes were registered before 2000 and 42% since 2000. Now this doesn't account for the number of units, right? So it's just the total number of owners, corporations, 58% before 2000, 42% since 2000. So, you know, for the whole of history of Strata, 58% was before 2000. In the last 19 years, there's a fairly substantial amount have registered since then. So even the total number of schemes you would think is on that trajectory, but the total number of units proportionally would be much, much higher. This is the part I like. 4,303 full-time Strata managers and 5,000 other employees employed directly by the Strata industry. 3.2 million call-out jobs, which represents close to $6 billion in value annually. And then professional services, so lawyers and, you know, when you get insurance valuations, and accountants do audits of your financial statements. 441,000 of those jobs were issued, which is also close to $1 billion. Oh, my clicker's broken. Can you see if we can get a oh. No. Oh, damn it. The total bricks and mortar replacement value of all strata properties in Australia is more than $1 trillion. Now that's not the real estate value. That's not what they're worth from a how much could you sell it for perspective. That's just the replacement value. That's the cost of the bricks and mortar. That's right. Here we go.
That one?
No.
Just the word. Yeah. Like,
Yeah, so $1 trillion.
just go back. You're right, but
I think it's going to scroll.
yeah, I think we'll just go back here. Sorry. Oh, how did it get to it? Just go back to
Sorry, guys.
Sorry.
You could adjust the time to longer time.
Yeah, that's what we just.
Yeah, I don't want it to be. I don't want it to play. I want it to be.
Longer than 20 seconds.
Yeah.
Then don't increase, spend 20 seconds on each slide.
We'll
So
see.
it should just go on.
Yeah,
to play
I don't.
mode,
All right, we'll fix it as we go. But I don't want it to scroll because
Yeah.
we'll stop and talk about a lot of things. All right, where were we here? This is new. This is the New South Wales version of the same.
We did have issues with the Wi-Fi.
It might be my.
Just
Can we reset and go back to?
we'll just
Technology.
Sorry, guys. I'm glad I got Mel here because I don't think I'll be able to cope with this the way I'm feeling at the moment. While you're doing that, I'm going to go get my bottle of water.
So Chris, just on that note, the commercial viable for the units equals to the strata manager. So for my friends, he lives in a smaller luxury townhouse.
Yep.
Like 15 units,
Yeah.
which is pretty expensive. But
Yep.
they couldn't get good strata managers to manage it. What's your recommendation for future?
Well, so if you've got a, if you're living in a luxury apartment building that of a very high value, you probably could afford, you know, so typically we wouldn't look after something of 15 units because of those commercial numbers. But if someone with 15 units came to us and said, well, we're prepared to pay
Higher.
double
Yeah.
fees, well then it amounts to managing a much larger building. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I could give a strata manager that building, and even though their number of units is lower, well actually they're generating a similar amount to if that was a 30 or 40 unit
Because they
building.
don't know the market, so, and the first one they used, they blocked it for 3 years.
Yeah.
So like, they can only change it every 3 years.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It's a bit of frustration. For
Yeah.
them. Yeah.
So, you know, and the other thing about a contract, right, is that, and this is something that owners, corporations and committees often fail to realise, it doesn't, if you've got a contract with a strata manager or a cleaner or whoever, it doesn't mean that, that, you know, you're married to them and that and you can't leave. It just means that you've got a contract. If you decide that you don't want to continue with them, you can go and negotiate with them and say, well, actually, we don't, you know, we're in an unhappy arrangement here. We would like to leave. What are our options? Most, including me, would say, okay, well, you've got 2 years left on your contract.
Yep.
It's unreasonable for me to say, well, you have to pay me 2 years worth of fees, but I might say, you know, let's agree to a settlement of 4 months management fees,
Yep.
you know, and then you can, and then you can go. And even if you can't agree to that, still doesn't mean that you need their permission before you go. It means you can do whatever you like. They might sue you and say, hey, we've got a contract and I have damages now because you haven't honoured it.
Yep.
They
And
might
they'll-
tell you that you can't leave because you haven't followed the contract, despite the fact that they were actually misinterpreting the contract.
Exactly, that's right.
Which is what happened to us when we were trying to come across to you.
That's right, I remember that, yeah. And I had to have a big argument with Sally Shaw. She's gone now, by the way. All right, so where do we get to?
1 trillion.
You just, oh, it's changed again.
Yeah, it's still not working.
If you go autoplay, you can select bring back.
Just manually
Yeah.
get through, yeah.
Outside menu.
Has it got a manual? Surely it's got a manual.
I think there might be something wrong with that slide or something.
Yeah, just you've got to make it little slide.
Just go past
Go
it.
down the slide and talk from memory, that's where it's
Well,
That's the truth, yes.
talk from memory.
just go past all of it. No.
Sometimes sometimes you know the content, but you just need
Which
the
one
slide
do
to
you
follow.
Yeah,
That's the
that's
thing.
right.
Oh yeah, I'm talking about that now.
After late night starts.
Exactly, late night last night, yeah, do it all from memory.
All right. We'll go back here. This one is what I wanted to get to. All right, this is the ACT. Is this the ACT?
Yeah.
Where does it say that? Yeah, ACT. So this is the ACT story. We have 10% of the ACT live in a strata title building. It'll be substantially changed because of the last year or two. 3,189 units plans, this is the I don't know where they got this data from because this is way lower than it actually is. Anyone, you know, Coben would be, excuse me, units plan for something? 4.9 something, right. And these it'll be 4.6, I'd say, yeah. So owners corporations are registered in numerical order, right? So if your units plan 4.6, it means you're the 4,600th units plan that exists. What's even IQ's in the fours, isn't it? 4,000, 4,125 or something? 4.7, brand new one? Yeah. So we're up to about 4,700 units planned. So this data is pretty old, but you know, we'll forgive the University of New South Wales. If it was the ANU, I'm sure they would have done a better job. So that is, you know, according to these numbers, about 53,000 total number of units. Now, our graph here is even more pronounced. 46% of those were registered before 2000 in Canberra, and 54% were registered since 2000, which is quite interesting. Can I get rid of that?
Really, isn't it?
Yeah.
We didn't have any high rock. All the cranes everywhere. Yeah.
All the cranes in the sky. And,
Cranes everywhere.
yeah, 100%. Did you know there are 28,000 units at various stages of development in the ACT at the moment? 28,000 units.
Yeah, that's about right.
You know, I've read some figures I sent around. Did you read that article that I posted the other day? It was 350,000 units in Metro Australia being developed at the moment.
And one particular unit block with, what was it, 2,000 units in Brisbane.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right.
How many floors would that be? That'd be,
I don't know.
that'd have to be
It
20
was like
floors.
Yeah, exactly, right.
Yeah.
Try and get anything done at that one.
Oh, yeah.
The firm that I used to work with has got what they call a crane index. They're an international organisation. We've got what's called a crane index. The number of cranes is usually a barometer of how healthy the economy is. Basically, because the building industry is a huge driver of the economy.
Yeah.
You know, it employs people such as strata managers, not just builders, strata managers, professionals.
Yeah.
So the number of cranes you see up there is a pretty good sign of the economy.
Yeah, and that's in any market, you know.
That's right.
I remember I went to the Monaco Formula One Grand Prix a few years ago, and there were cranes everywhere, and everyone was saying, yeah, well, the economy's so great here, you know, it's just driving forward. So it is a really good indicator. And think about this, right? So those numbers that I mentioned earlier, from a business owner's perspective, you need about 800,000 units for a strata management portfolio. Well, there are 28 new strata managers that we need to recruit within our industry. And I can tell you it's a small pool. To find 20, if I was an accountant and I needed to, and our industry was going to grow by 28 new accountants next year, it's not that hard to find them. You can find accountants. It's a diverse marketplace and people are coming out, going into university, and there's probably 100 new accountants that graduate every year. That's not the case with strata managers. We've got to find 28 new strata managers from people that are probably, you know, where are we going to get them? JB Hi-Fi and, you know,
Yeah, that's right.
those sort of places. That's the reality we're facing. I can tell you no one does a law degree and then goes and becomes a strata manager. They usually go and become lawyers. And no one does an accounting degree and then goes, you know what, I'm going to go and get yelled at all day by people that they go and become accountants. So that in itself is a challenge. For every one strata manager in our company, we have 2 support staff, right? So presuming everyone else runs their business like we do, and they don't, but it's probably not too far off. It might be for every strata manager there's 1 support person, but for our ratio, let's presume that's universal. We've got 28 new strata managers that we're going to have to recruit within our industry, and then another, you know, 60 support people or 50 support people.
Do they include like counsellors and so forth?
Yeah, exactly. Maybe they should, yeah. So in the ACT, what's that, $21 billion worth of replacement value, bricks and mortar value, not real estate value. So this is why I say it's incredible to me that this is the first time anyone has really done a deep dive, or any academic, you know, group or government agencies really thought about strata, because It's a huge, 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 huge industry. How is it that the strata industry is so poorly regulated and almost forgotten about when 10% of the country live in a strata titled building, right? You know, this is an illustration of what I was talking about, you know, since 2000, like it's shot up like that. Now, I can tell you that it is projected that by the decade of the 2030s, which is not far away, 50% of the population of Australia will live in a strata titled property. So how this is not front and centre of the real estate industry rather than the ugly third cousin, I've got no idea. This is the industry to watch. All right, that's my warm up, if you like. Principles of strata. What is strata? What is strata? What do you think the definition of strata is?
Well, it's a number of units, whether it's commercial, residential, that are joined together, basically a common core.
It's pretty close. I think you're on the right track. What can I pick on you?
Honestly, don't have too much to add to that. I'd say probably, yeah, like a group of apartments all managed jointly for the purpose of benefiting the whole.
Yeah, you're all on the right theme there. Well, this is the definition, which isn't very helpful. Strata is the plural of stratum, which is a Latin word meaning layered or spread. That doesn't help anyone at all. So, this is what the Strata Community Australia website says about strata. And I'll read this and then we're going to go back over it because there's some worthwhile takeouts. Strata title allows individual ownership of part of a property called a unit in the ACT and generally an apartment or townhouse, combined with shared ownership in the remainder called the common property, foyers, driveways and gardens, through a legal entity called the Owners Corporation or Body Corporate or Strata Company Community Association, depending on where you are. So let's just read that again. Strata title allows individual ownership of part of a property combined with shared ownership in the remainder. So strata means you can own your unit and it's yours, and you can also jointly own all of the other stuff that you need to live in your unit. You can jointly own the lift that helps you get to your unit. You can jointly own the garbage enclosure, and you can jointly own the basement car park, and you can jointly own the swimming pool and the other amenities. This is a juvenile thing that I should get rid of. Where did strata originate? There's a chocolate for who can guess this. What country?
Australia.
Oh, damn it. Who told you guys that?
And it's an Australian invention.
Did ya?
It's an innovation from Australia.
No one ever gets that. I'm going to ban phones from now on.
Where are the chocolates?
No chocolates. That's cheating.
I would have thought it would have been the US.
Yeah, so that's most would think that, or a lot of people think
It's an Australian innovation in property law that has been copied around the globe.
it has been. It actually has been, right? Strata is a uniquely Australian innovation that has been replicated the world over. Clearly, I have read that same Google thing because I'm basically plagiarising.
Strange that Australian picked the Latin word.
Sorry?
It's strange that Australian picked the
A Latin word?
strata.
Well, you know, Australia is a enclave of Great Britain once upon a time, and you know, pompous British law follows Latin definitions. Yeah, so a uniquely Australian innovation that originated in New South Wales. Now, the way it came about was in, you know, the affluent, well-to-do eastern suburbs kind of areas in Sydney in the late 50s, was starting to see a prevalence of people wanting to buy and own apartments close to amenity and close to the beach, and land was, you know, land was scarce. You couldn't continue to just build more and more houses and create blocks close to the areas that people wanted to live. So we started seeing these flats. You know, if you go to Randwick and Coogee and those places, these Bondi, 2 and 3 story walk-ups, right? And the way that they would make those properties available for people to own is they would create a company. Has anyone heard of company title? No? There's a few in Canberra. Allura Flats, not far from where you are. That's a company title property. It's not an owners corporation of strata. The old nunnery in Campbell. You know Allura Flats, where it looks like a haunted house on Allura Street and right near the Geocon development.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes, I know what you mean.
Needs to be knocked down, and it's like it looks always. I always think it looks like a haunted house from a movie. The old nunnery in Campbell, you know where the war memorial is. They used to have the nunnery there. Now they've got townhouses. That's a company title property, and a few in Forest and various other places. So what the company title is they would there would be a company incorporated which owned the entire complex, and you, to own your unit, would buy shares in the company, and your share certificate would say you're a shareholder in Allura Flats Proprietary Limited, and as a consequence of owning shares number 1 to 10, you have the exclusive right to the area defined as, Unit 4. Does that make sense? So as that became more and more popular in New South Wales, banks and credit unions were pretty uncomfortable when people wanted to take out mortgages to buy something that didn't really give them anything, right?
A loan against a shareholding.
Exactly, yeah. Which is it didn't really, you didn't own anything, so you went and got a loan against your shares, but your shares didn't mean you owned a property, you owned part of the whole of the thing. So it was really difficult for banks and credit unions to get their head around, and that gave rise to the first legal expression of strata law in like 1962 or something like that. You'd be able to tell me if you googled it. Close enough. So that gave rise to the first legal expression of strata. Now, if you go anywhere through Malaysia and Vietnam and areas in our geographic region, they have effectively just copied the New South Wales strata laws, and every time the New South Wales strata laws had been updated, still they continue to follow suit from us. If you go over to America, they have more like the old company title arrangement. They have co-ops and cooperatives where they jointly manage the owners corporation or whatever they call it through a collective cooperative. So this is what the history of strata title looked like in Canberra. So back in the day, we had company title. That's when Allura Flats and some of those places were built. Then we had the Unit Titles Ordinance in 1970, which was a very thin document that just really dealt with the titling arrangements of units plans. Then we had the Unit Titles Act in 2001, which was an improvement, but it was still pretty light on. That was when I came into the industry. We worked off the Unit Titles Act, and it was probably a document, thinner than that. It's pretty easy to master the thing. You could almost memorise it in a couple of weeks. In 2011, we had the first really useful legal expression of strata in Canberra. We had the Unit Titles Management Act, or the Unit Titles Act 2011, which is now a document about that thick. Rob, I know you've got it there in front of you. Oh, it's part of my pack. Can I lift that up? So this is what we work off now, which is reasonably substantial. And then not long after that, we did this reorganising of the legislation. So we pulled out the stuff that was related to the planning and the titling. So if you're an executive committee member or a strata manager, you now look at the Unit Titles Management Act. That talks about how an owners corporation operates, whereas the Unit Titles Act, which is still around, is how do you register a units plan? What are the processes if you wanted to apply for a units plan, and the planning land titling type stuff. Now, it's still relevant, the Unit Titles Act, for us from time to time. If you wanted to say you worked out that there was a problem with the units of entitlement schedule, well, you would work out how you amend the units of entitlement in the Unit Titles Act, not the Management Act. Or if someone wanted to do a boundary change and get an extra car park or something like that, you wouldn't find the answers to how you go about that. Incidentally, it's...
Or you wanted to split the units plan into a residential one and a commercial one.
Exactly, yeah. Which, if you wanted to work out, if someone asked you that question, you wanted to work out how do you go about that, you won't find the answer in the Unit Titles Management Act, you'd find the answer in the Unit Titles Act. It's effectively impossible, but it's not the point. Okay, this is some of the jargon that you might have heard in relation to strata. So strata scheme is a New South Wales vernacular. In the ACT, we're a units plan. Body corporate or strata corporation, we're an owners corporation. Articles and bylaws, we call them the rules. Sounds like it's topical for you guys at the moment. Strata manager agent is manager. Lot, there's no lots in the ACT, probably confusingly. You get, financial statements that refer to lots. Even we send out financial statements that refer to lots. It's because it's proprietary software and I can't convince them to change it for ACT. You have units in the ACT. Levies are contributions. Committee in EC is executive committee. All right. So who manages a units plan? Tim?
The body corporate itself,
Yeah.
represented by the executive committee.
Nailed it, yeah. The owners corporation manages the units plan. The owners corporation. And this is from the legislation. The owners corporation for a units plan is responsible for managing the units plan. An owners corporation may be helped by one or more of the following: the executive committee, or a strata manager, or a service contractor, so building managers and various others. So this is what it says, according to the legislation, the responsibilities of the owners corporation are. And this is important, right? Because when we get through this, one of the points that I'd like to resonate with you is that the owners corporation exists, whilst it's a very important job, for a pretty limited scope, right? The owners corporation doesn't exist to replace all of the laws that exist in the world. It really exists for a pretty limited range of things. Maintain all common property, including the structure of any buildings. Insure the whole of the property for full replacement value. Administer the finances and common funds of the group of owners. Administer the secretarial functions, including the conduct of meetings of members, documentation of minutes, and dealing with all correspondence. Resolve disputes involving members of the owners corporation and enforce the rules, right? So what leaps out to you from this, Robert? What are the key things here? What's the point you think that I'm trying to make? The owners corporation exists for just these things, right? Too many owners corporations and executive committees want to be involved in how people live their lives and and it's just not what you exist for. You're not running the United Nations. You're there to make sure the lifts go up and down, the building's insured, and the rules are adhered to.
Any interesting example on .15 with resolve dispute?
Yeah, so resolve disputes involving members of the owners corporation and enforce the owners corporation rules. What it means is, what it's getting at there is resolve disputes in relation to the rules that are in place. And the rules that are in place can only be rules relevant to the other owners corporation's functions, right? So the owners corporation is responsible to maintain the building, right? So therefore rules are appropriate to the extent that it serves the owners corporation's obligation. So where you own your unit, you're entitled to own your unit without interference from the owners corporation. Well, the owners corporation can make a rule that says even though you own your unit, you can't do things to your unit without permission. And the reason that that's not an infringement of your rights is because, well, the owners corporation is responsible to maintain the whole building. So it's appropriate for us to say you're not allowed to, you know, drill holes into the structure because that has an impact, you know, potentially.
That reminds me of one of the latest notice. The owners of the unit, if they're lifting weights,
Yeah.
then drop their weights on the
Precisely, right? So the reason being because if someone drops weights on the floor, it causes a disturbance for the other people who live there. Yeah, right, Coven. Ah.
In the building. Yeah, a lot of people have mini gyms and some people have commercial gyms in the building.
Yeah, look, I think it's one of the single biggest problems
Yeah,
of living in partnership with others.
yeah.
So I suppose there's a default set of rules,
There's a
and the executive, the owners corporation can add to those rules as long as it doesn't compromise law or the other portion.
yeah. So there's a whole section I've got on rules, and we'll get to it, but we'll just hover on it for a moment. Yeah, there's a default set of rules. There's only 12 of them that every owners corporation inherits when it comes into existence, and they deal with noise, hazardous use of unit, and not using the common property to unreasonably interfere with other people, and all that sort of stuff. Pets, right? The owners corporation can then create its own set of rules that respond appropriately to their specific building. If you've got a gym, you can have rules about how the gym's to be used. Swimming pool, you know, can't use it after 10 o'clock because it's... So you can cultivate appropriate rules for your circumstances. But that said, your rules can't contradict another part of the Act. So if the Act says the way it's set in stone, the way that we call on owners to pay to raise levies is by a general meeting that everyone gets the chance to vote on. You can't then have a rule that says, oh, we're going to change that and just the committee can set the contributions. That contravenes another section of the Act and it's therefore unenforceable. But it also has to be relevant to the purpose of the owners corporation in the first place. You can't pass rules and say, well, only owner-occupiers are allowed to be on the committee. You know, that's... Or you can't pass a rule to say, you know, only single white males under 30 are allowed to live in the building. That is clearly outside of the purpose of the owners corporation. The purpose of the owners corporation is to maintain the common property, insure the building, administer the finances.
Could you have done that if it was company title? You could put that in the company constitution.
Well, maybe.
Say the shares can only be bought
Actually,
by single white males under 30.
Actually, you can. You probably can't do that in particular because that's discriminatory, but you can...
I'm just spitballing that. But
Yeah, but the answer is yes, you can, because you can have clauses. You know, a lot of retirement places are still done as company title, and they say you're not allowed to buy shares unless you are over 55 or, you know, otherwise an invalid.
Out of rules, can I put two on the table that I'm interested in hearing more about specifically?
Yep.
Aesthetics of balconies,
Yep.
particularly washing,
Yep.
and smoking.
Yes. We'll when we get to rules, we'll talk about those ones in particular. All right. I'm going to keep you guys in suspense. So can I just... I wonder if I do this, if I'm ruining the day. So, you would be forgiven for thinking that the reason for an owners corporation and the reason for a committee and the reason for managers looks like this. The reason all of those things are necessary is because there is because there's money in a bank account that needs to be managed, and then second from that, there's a need to make decisions and facilitate, you know, meetings and all, and consider quotes and consider how we spend that money. And then sort of thirdly, less significantly, there also happens to be a building somewhere. You'd be forgiven for this kind of thinking, right? And it's totally on its head. The reason that we exist is because there's a building. And because there's a building, right, that's the core of what's going on. There is a structure and a building that people occupy and live in and conduct business in. Because there is a building, we need to do stuff to that building, which means we have to get money because you've got to pay for doing that stuff. The lifts need to be maintained and the grease traps need to be emptied. We need to collect money to respond to the core thing, which is the building. Thirdly, you know, we need to have meetings and compliance to decide, you know, which contractors we're going to use to service lift. We're having decisions about how we spend that money that we have collected. So, I mean, does that make sense, the point that I'm making? It's really bizarre, right? We use this software called Property IQ, which is the software that we use to manage owners' corporations. We also have Building Link, which is the software we use to manage the buildings, right? And I go to Property IQ, which is owned by Macquarie Bank. And has more than 80%, Macquarie Bank more than 80% of the strata industry across Australia, right? So when I go to Property IQ and I say, look, your software allows me to collect levies and run budgets, but it doesn't tell me anything about the building, you know, there's no asset register and there's no facilities management component of it. What can you enhance it? And they say quite incredibly, well, you know, Chris, most strata managers aren't interested in that. They're only interested in the strata management side of it, you know. So we're not going to redesign our software just because you want it. You're the only one asking for it. No one in strata really cares that much about that stuff. How can you not care? That is the core central component of what we're doing. There is a building. Yes, we raise money and yes, we make decisions, but if you take away the fact that there's a building, none of those other things are relevant. You don't need to collect money and make decisions. So, gone off on a bit of a tangent there, and I've got to see if I can. How do I get that back up, Mel? I'll test you now. Yeah. And that's sort of that's, you know, it's symptomatic of what's wrong with the thinking of strata. And if I can leave you guys with any lesson, it is, you know, this is the main point from which everything else flows, right? Maintain the common property and the structure of the building. That's the most important thing. Insure the building is irrelevant if there is no building, right? So maintaining the building is the most important thing. Insure the building, administer the finances. Again, take away the building, you don't need finances. So all of these things flow from that core central starting point. Does that make sense? Executive committee. What is the executive committee and what does the committee do? Tells jokes. You guys have a great committee, actually. I had
Sounds like fun.
yeah, I had is it Georgie or Georgia? Georgie. I had her in here the other night because she's now on the committee of Sienna as well, and she's in about 3 or 4 buildings that we manage, actually. You know, and she sat here for, you know, half an hour after the meeting finished just to talk about how much she enjoys being on the Coburn Executive Committee. So we've got to start coming to their committee meetings, I think. So other than telling jokes, what does the committee do?
Well, primarily it makes decisions on behalf of the owners' corporation.
Yeah, exactly, right? But what the Act says is that the Executive Committee of an Owners Corporation exercises the functions of the corporation. It it effectively is, you know, it does all of those things that we said the owners corporation is responsible for. Well, the executive committee carries that burden. Now, I'm going to read through this definition, and then we're going to come back to it. I'm going to read through it quickly, and then I want to go over it because there's some takeouts here that really are important to keep in front of your mind when you act as an executive committee member. So, the executive committee of an owners corporation exercises the functions of the corporation. It's hugely broad. It says you are, you know, omnipotent. You are the owners corporation. Without limiting subsection 1, so without taking anything away from that really broad statement, the executive committee's functions include the following: developing matters in relation to the common property and the strategic affairs of the owners corporation, submitting matters developed under that paragraph to the owners corporation for consideration, monitoring the owners corporation's financial performance, approving the annual financial statements and budget for presentation to the owners at the AGM, supervising the treasurer, secretary, manager and communications officer, carrying out the decisions of the owners corporation made at general meetings, and the committee must exercise its functions as the corporation directs by resolution or, in the absence of a resolution, as the committee considers appropriate. Right. There is something in the language that is informative about your role. And what do you think it is? Is anyone picking up on where I'm going with this? Let's have another read, and I'll take it a bit slower. So it starts with this broad brush. The executive committee has all the functions of the owners corporation. It's the Wild West. Then it says, without taking anything away from that, the executive committee's functions include the following. Here's where the language becomes important. Developing matters in relation to the common property. Developing matters in relation to. And developing matters in relation to the strategic affairs of the owners corporation. Not deciding the things, advancing matters, developing matters. Submitting matters developed to the owners corporation for consideration.
And the owners corporation is
the whole lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not working out what it wants to do and then doing it, developing those things and then submitting matters developed to everyone for a decision.
Well, essentially, the way I think about it is it's like a listed company. The executive committee is the board, and certain things they have to take to the AGM and get their shareholders to vote on, and certain things they don't.
You've stolen my thunder. That's exactly the analogy. It's a board of directors of the shareholders, right? Monitoring the owners corporation's financial performance. Monitoring. The language is important. Approving the annual financial statements and budget for presentation to the owners at the AGM.
Yeah, definitely a board.
Right? Supervising the treasurer, carrying out the decisions of the owners corporation, carrying out the decisions, not deciding on the things in its own right. Right? And then it says, then it starts really broad, and then it starts to close the walls in and direct you to say, well, actually, you've got this broad power, but actually it's monitoring and submitting matters and referring back and deferring back to all of the owners. So it starts broad, and then it sort of starts to close the walls in until it gets to this point where it really limits you, and it says the executive committee must exercise its functions as you're told, as directed. So now we're really narrow. Actually, you don't have much power at all. And then it craps the bed and says, well, in the absence of that, you can do whatever you like. So it starts broad, closes the walls, and then broadens it out again. Now, why do you think that is? Yeah, exactly. And it sort of needs to give you a whole heap of power and then limit that power, but then say, well, you know what, without any other direction, you can exercise that power.
The last one's a catch-all.
It's a catch-all, yeah. So it's sort of, it's a dichotomy of giving you authority, taking it away or restricting it, but then saying, but, all other things considered, if something happens and you don't have direction, well, you can act as you consider appropriate. Now,
3B is important. Just from past experience, the AGM we only have like 10-15%
Yeah.
So like some of the important decisions couldn't be made with that kind of
Exactly,
limited
yeah.
amount of people.
And also, it's difficult to call a meeting and to get everyone
Yeah.
together, and some things are time sensitive.
Mm.
I can promise you now, if I'm an owner in an owners corporation and I'm not on the committee, I'm just an owner, and I got a letter from the committee that says, hey, we're calling a meeting because there's a terrible sewage overflow affecting the basement and there's human waste everywhere. We want to get a meeting together and here's 2 weeks notice so we can talk about what to do. I'd go, what are you talking about? Get a plumber, go do it, fix it.
Because we get a lot of head applications, a lot of new people moving in.
Yeah,
We have to send out, like, even for us all to click the yes or no on building link,
yeah,
all 7 of us doesn't always happen.
yeah.
So trying to get 130, 127, 100, whatever,
Never happen.
to like even getting a portion of them to click on building link and hit. At times we're like, oh, there's just too much administration.
Yeah,
So trying to get all the owners
Getting
to do
everybody
that.
in.
absolutely.
We need to have a meeting because the lift's broken down and Chris has been stuck in it for the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, exactly, right? I can tell you. Yeah,
Yeah, maybe we can spend some money to fix it.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'd be annoyed at my committee if that happened, right? So, committee office holders. So I've given you all these packs, by the way. You're probably curious to know what that all means. Some of this stuff is stuff we're going to go through today. Other stuff is just good stuff for you guys to have because it's a good source of reference. So I've given you all a copy of the Unit Titles Management Act. Within here there are the rules, code of conduct for executive committee members. It's this one here. The code of conduct for committee members.
Oh, yes, this one here.
Also, this document that I think when you find the time, you should all read. This is not an excerpt. It's an excerpt from the Act, but it's an excerpt from various sections of the Act dealing with executive committees, what they can and can't do, what they must do. And I thought I had in here maybe I don't. The definitions of office holders, but I might not.
I noticed that social coordinator's not on there.
It's not. Well, there is a role actually called a communications officer. Well, it's close. So what I might do is get everyone to refer to their Unit Titles Management Act. And if we look at page number 25. Oh, I opened it right to the right spot. Page number 25 talks about the office holders of the executive committee. Now, at your first executive committee meeting, the Act requires you to elect people from the committee to particular positions. Positions being chairperson, secretary and treasurer. So tell me, Tim, what is the role of the chairperson?
The next one, 41.
I think as we've understood it, is basically to chair the meetings of the executive committee and to manage the business of the executive committee.
Yeah, it's kind of the leader of the committee, if you like. Specifically, they chair the meetings of the committee, and specifically, the chairperson automatically chairs general meetings as well. And interestingly enough, being the chairperson carries with it certain powers as well, right? The chairperson at a committee meeting can break a deadlock. If it's 2 votes yes, 2 votes no, the chairperson can say, okay, well, I'm calling it and make it pass, yeah. They can also do that at general meetings. Now, I'm a strata manager, I do this for a living, and it was only recently that I read that. I was surprised to learn that. I didn't realise that a chairperson could actually do that at general meetings of the owners' corporation. They can break a deadlock. So always learning. Secretary's functions. Robert, what does the secretary do?
Well, I would say to document all meetings, etc., and to make sure that other members are aware of those core meetings, etc.
Yeah, that's right. Now, actually, going back to this document that I gave to everyone, what the executive committee may and cannot do, right? The executive committee must keep minutes and records and accounts. This is a critical function. You can't go about your business and make decisions without keeping minutes and records of those decisions. So the secretary, has to record the minutes, but it's actually a core requirement that you must keep that information. Bridget, what is the role of the treasurer? Yeah. Yep. Correct, yeah. Now, if you look at the secretary's functions and the treasurer's functions, it actually gets a little bit frightening, right? Because it says treasurer, Tim, you're the treasurer, right? So you're responsible, did you know, Tim? So on behalf of the owners' corporation, give to each unit owner notice of a determination of general fund contributions under Section 78. Have you been doing that?
The Strata manager's been doing that on my behalf.
Ah,
Yes, so
fair enough.
He actually employs someone.
Exactly. So that's where I was going with this. If you read this and you're a treasurer or a secretary and you go, holy crap, I'm meant to be doing all these things. I've got to account for all money received. I've got to account for all money paid. You know, you'd be forgiven for having an anxiety attack. Well, yes, you as the treasurer have the overall responsibility, I guess, or an authority of the responsibilities defined under Section 43. However, you delegate your functions to the strata manager. Importantly, that the executive committee can delegate some or all of its functions to a strata manager in writing. Now, that's happened in writing because that's what our management agreement says. It talks about the delegated functions. But importantly, you still have the authority. So you can say, you know what, I'm delegating all of the secretary functions to the strata manager and you send notices out and you do the minutes. However, don't do it without sending them to me first for me to say, I'm happy with that. Or you can turn around and say, you know what, I don't like the way you do minutes. I'm taking back that responsibility.
Do you have buildings where you get that different level of
Heaps.
responsibility shift?
Yeah.
Like some buildings where they're like, nah, you pretty much do everything and just come to us with the really expensive stuff. And other buildings where they literally want to see every invoice from the gardener and approve them one by one by one.
Yeah, there's a huge variance. And it comes down, if I can, you know, if I don't mean this to be rude or offensive, but it comes down to affluence, usually, right? So down on Flemington Road, in the boondocks, in Harrison, in an apartment building, they're all busy. They all get up and they go to work every day and they probably work 10 hours. They're not interested and they don't have the capacity to be, you know, having this extra job. But funnily enough, you go to Campbell, you know, Greenwich Apartments, they'll pontificate over where the comma is in a rule and they'll have meetings and it'll be, and you're like, you know, they run it like the United Nations. And neither one is right or wrong, you know. Probably the guys that are more involved are really driving, you know, it's their homes and their properties. So things drive differently when they're really engaged. The guys that are apathetic, you know, I mean, I stand by our business and we try and always do the right thing, but, you know, you can fall into the cracks of, if you don't care, you know, you're not very vocal, your strata manager probably forgets about you and you become less of a priority of, you know, being proactive and on top of things because you just don't hear from them. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, I suppose, is the point of that.
So I suppose it all depends on time management, the level of expertise that any particular NEC member thinks they've actually got.
Yeah.
And therefore they particularly want to have their point.
Yeah.
You know, so they'll pass on the duties to yourself, but they still want to be heavily involved in that particular function.
Yeah, and and
it may be because they've got a particular skill that they
absolutely
can contribute towards.
the amount of treasurers who also are, chartered accountants, they know what they're doing. They know what they're they know what they're looking at. And a strata manager, I'm pretty good with finances. I'm not too bad, but I was asked politely to leave in year 11 at Darramarlin College. I don't have an accounting degree, An accountant knows more than I do, and they're able to add some expertise. A lot of lawyers end up on executive committees, and they will often do things like review the rules, and that's, well, actually, we think this is unenforceable. Have we got some lawyers in the room?
No.
No?
We have someone else.
Oh, Alex is a lawyer. So, the other dimension of that as well is the kind of building. If you've got townhouses with no basement, Class B, which we'll get to in a moment, but Class B means everyone owns their own property and it's not really common property, your roof and your walls. Well, there's not much need to get too involved, Most of the issues that they face relate to behaviour, noise, parking. They're pretty low rent issues. When you have a mixed use building with commercial tenants on the ground floor and various, the building is much more complicated and basements and a lot more moving parts, well, there's a lot more need to be involved. Robert, your particular expertise in building maintenance and how buildings work is relevant to IQ apartments. If you went and bought a townhouse and lived out at,
Even 71 Constitution, which is maybe all townhouses.
yeah, exactly. What's that one called? It's called 71. Yeah, that's original. Yeah. So, this is something that people really like to see, usually on committees. So it's a little gift, my gift to you. An executive committee member is not civilly liable for conduct engaged in honestly and without recklessness.
Anything dodgy we do, you bias officers.
You have office liability insurance.
Liability insurance, yeah.
Now, in the exercise of a function under this Act, or in the reasonable belief that conduct was in the exercise of a function under this Act, any civil liability that would, apart from this section, attach to the Executive Committee attaches instead to the Owners Corporation. In this section, conduct means an act or omission to do an act. So, let me ask you, is it reasonable for you as an Executive Committee to assume you don't have to check too closely the bank account because you've got a strata manager and you're paying them to do it, you've delegated their authority and they're licensed, and is that reasonable?
Yeah, and if you don't do your job properly, we just do the next.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I would tend to think that you're somewhat off the hook when you've engaged a professional to do these things. If you have to atone for your sins at a court and they say, well, what did you do to make sure that the Owners Corporation was being run properly? And you said, well, we appointed a strata manager and we paid him to do it, a handsome sum, and that was a reasonable thing to do. I think you've got a fair bit of protection as a consequence of that. I would find it really difficult to accept this day and age a complicated building, or even a not too complicated building, where the committee looks after it themselves and takes on the burden of all of those responsibilities. What happens if the fire maintenance wasn't done properly and there was a fire and people were killed, or injured?
Just on that note, the executive member got protection from that, but when we delegate that role to you, why wouldn't we delegate that kind of protection, kind of cascade down to you guys? Because you guys are representing us.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't it go that way, like cascade down?
Well, I think that's just a matter of the difference is the committee is a voluntary role, right? Being on the committee is voluntary. You don't get paid for it, and you don't necessarily have expertise. Who here has been in a meeting, an AGM, and they've said, okay, time to elect a committee. Who's interested? And everyone's Oh, was it?
Who wants to elect a committee and half the room stood up?
Really?
Oh, really?
Ah.
Have you got an apartment block filled with lawyers, accountants, public servants?
Apparently so.
Because I tend to find that's the three personality types that end up on committees: lawyers, accountants, and public servants.
It's actually, it's not, you're close, it's not quite right. It's bush lawyers and bush accountants
Yeah,
For sure.
that's very true.
that are usually super interested. Is that right at Coven?
Oh,
It was contested, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was contested.
And it got down to about, like, I think about 11.
Oh, wow.
It's gone down to 7.
How's it never contested? How's it always installations? Like, there's not even a ballot.
Yeah. Do you know what? That is actually a sign of the times, I think.
Yeah.
People are more interested in strata. Canberra's a funny place too, right? So we operate in New South Wales as well. I had a sort of parallel career in Sydney for several years, and we're in Newcastle. We've got an office in Newcastle. Canberra is the worst place to be a strata manager. It really is. Because
Oh, yeah,
it's...
That's what I was just saying.
I'm just wondering whether the number of defects, yours is a relatively new building, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether the number of defects in buildings that are very well published nowadays, whether that would have an effect on the number of...
Yeah, absolutely.
That one of these, sorry.
On
The committee member.
Yeah, to check their investment.
Enhanced by
Yes.
someone wanting to make, just before that all came, like the voting happened, someone in the, had brought a proposal to the meeting at the last minute for a significant change to the facade of the building. So
Ah.
I think a few people were like,
It's a change to the facade of a brand new building.
Yeah.
yeah,
What?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
It might have incentivized people to get on and say,
to be interested.
I think the builder and the architect designed the building a particular way for a particular reason.
No.
No?
Insufficient.
Okay. Because, you know, they're professionals.
Yeah. Is that, did you say that facetiously?
Their design was insufficient.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Ah, yeah.
Have
So,
anything to do with sun controller and...
Builder and architect doesn't know what they're doing, no, not at all.
sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
Have you had an example of some committees where no one's
Yeah.
on the executive?
Yep.
Like what happens?
Happens all the time. It happens less and less in our business because we manage particular kinds of buildings where I guess people are more interested. But, you know, we've got 100 units out in the 2913 apartments in Flemington Road. Huge problems with defects. They are currently suing the builder for defects. The place leaks like a sieve, and we get to the AGM and we have to badger people to be on the committee, and I think, wow,
But I
it's
guess
crazy.
in that case, it's also like in ours, we're starting up and it's kind of setting some of that culture stuff. But there you've got, you look at that and you go, God, I would not want to be on that committee. 'Cause
Yeah,
that's a big job.
it is. It's a shit sandwich is the
Like, who
technical.
wants to be in a committee that's
Yeah.
suing a developer?
Yeah, so you look at that and you go, oh, you're overwhelmed at the meaty work to do. You guys have a lot of work to do, but it's more transactional stuff. You know, you got to set the rules and establish some ways of operating. But none of those things in and of themselves would cause you to, you know, have an anxiety attack. But yeah, being on the committee and having to meet every month to, you know, advance this issue of suing the builder, yeah, God, you could be forgiven for not wanting to take that on. And again, you're not paid, so, you know, what is the reason you're doing it? Yeah, you're doing it because you've got a vested interest in it for the collective good, but you're actually doing work for everyone else who can't be bothered being on the committee as well, right? So the answer is yes, it does happen. If there's no committee, then any reference in the Act to a committee refers to all owners. So it's pretty disastrous, and it's okay when there's 20 units. I mean, it's still not desirable. If I went to a meeting that were 20 units and no one wanted to be on the committee, I probably wouldn't, you know, I'd sort of say I'm a bit bummed out, but it's okay. If I went to the Coben AGM and no one wanted to be on the committee, I wouldn't leave that room without having a committee, because we can't do, you know, the place just can't operate without a committee. Or, you know, Eclipse, 230 something units, you know, with problems of its own, you know, people breaking in. Didn't you guys have someone came in and broke in and stole your security system?
That's right, yeah. So we had so the master key was stolen. They then got access to the security room, so all the cameras feed back to recording here. opened the server rack and actually ripped out all of the recording gear. They knew
Same thing.
exactly what they were looking for.
Yeah.
So we had to have the master key changed. That was 30 grand worth of new locks everywhere.
Yeah.
And then we had to have all the camera recording software reinstalled.
Yeah.
So that whole thing was about 60 grand's worth of work.
Yeah. And actually, those two events happened within about a week of one another. And I remember at the time saying, this is the same.
Oh, it's the same person.
I reckon it's the same
Yeah,
group of
absolutely.
people that were doing it.
You will end up sending the backup in the cloud, isn't it?
Yeah, so we've now paid, so with our security camera upgrades, we've now got an internet connection that runs into the server room. So all of that is backed up into the cloud, so if someone came in again and took the hard drives, we've got copies in the cloud.
Just a question.
Yeah.
Do you actually capture the?
Well, actually,
footage of that break-in.
we
lost the footage of that break-in.
we had
It would have been stolen. That's why they steal the hard drives.
Yeah.
So the evidence of their break-in is stolen.
I d-
Special general meeting, I just loaded up cameras crowd, so it's very news.
yeah. Oh, that's right.
It's just a learning opportunity.
Yeah.
So we've had three sort of stages of cameras now. So we had some cameras put in, then we put in more after a break-in, then we put in even more after the servers were stolen, and what's happening next? Oh, at this AGM we're having a couple more put in as well.
And some of the insurance company kind of start charging high premium.
Absolutely.
Because of the
Yeah.
So we've now only got one insurer that will actually insure us.
It's exactly the
So
same with us.
last time we did the renewal, Sarah was like, I'm not even going to bother going to everybody else
Yeah.
because CHU were the only ones that are going to cover us. Everyone else is like,
Yeah. Because of your claims
For you
history.
guys, just
Bruce.
make sure you got your security as your
Yeah.
top issue.
Yeah.
That's really interesting because I have no idea where the server room is, let alone.
it'll be.
Do you guys have cameras at Coburn though?
Yeah,
We
we
do.
do.
Oh, you
Not
do?
many, though.
Yeah.
Okay.
Probably be where your building manager hangs out. They're usually co-located. Usually.
Kevy will know. Kevy will know where it is.
Oh yeah, I hope Kevin.
At the very least, the door to that room should have secure locks.
Yeah.
Very secure locks.
I should say though, whilst that sounds traumatic and horrible, we don't actually have that many problems. Like what I'm talking about happened over a number of years. It's not like
Yeah.
it was happening every single
Yeah.
week.
But you do pay for it, like you just say. In
Oh
your
yeah,
insurance.
we've only got one insurer, one
One
Strata
insurer
insurer that will now
yeah.
cover us.
That'll cover you, yeah.
Yeah.
I can't remember, it might have been Eclipse or both IQ and Eclipse, but you guys claimed the replacement of all of the locks and everything on your building insurance, right?
That
So,
was us. Yeah, we
yeah.
claimed all the locks.
so it was a big claim. It was a $50 or something thousand claim.
It was about 30 grand to redo the master keys.
Yeah, that's right. And it was one of your buildings that we went to the police and we had the clearest footage. Was it IQ maybe?
It could well be.
We had the clearest
And
footage of
they
these
know
guys,
the guys.
and they knew them. They went, "Oh, we know these guys,"
Yeah.
But
but
what do they do about it?
they did nothing
That's
about
us.
it. So, yeah, it was pretty
Yeah.
disappointing. Okay, validity of acts. An act done honestly by an executive committee is not invalid only because there was a defect or irregularity in or in relation to the member's election or appointment. So what this is saying is sometimes it happens, trust me, you find out someone who's on the committee, who's been on the committee for 10 years, who's like the head of the committee, the stalwart, actually doesn't own a unit and it's his wife that owns it and he's not on the title and you go. So this protects against that. We might have a break in a minute. Strata manager assisting the committee. So this is where the executive committee may, in writing given to the manager, delegate to the manager any of its functions under the Act. So in writing, you've covered that with your management agreement. You cannot delegate the function of the chairperson though. Chairperson cannot delegate to the strata manager. And there's various reasons for that. One is because you wield a fair bit of power. You don't want your strata manager making a call on a deadlock about the appointment of their management agreement for the next 3 years. You also don't want the strata manager being the proxy appointed, when you've got a fair degree of apathy in these buildings. You might have 200 plus apartments. and you have an AGM and only 10 people show up and then you've got 20 proxies, right? Your strata manager shouldn't have those proxies. They shouldn't control them. They should go to the chairperson if there's no one else appointed. And in fact, the Act precludes the strata manager or building manager from being appointed a proxy.
Sorry, just curious about that AGM or like a general meeting proxy or delegation. Is the chairperson able to delegate the managing of that meeting to strata management? Or?
Yeah, well, it's. I mean, the Act says that the chairperson can't delegate its functions to the strata manager. The strata manager can still run the meeting for you, and you just have someone else name the chairperson. That's probably how you guys have seen it happen from time to time. I actually don't like doing that. My personal style as a strata manager is get the chairperson to chair the meeting.
Yeah.
I get to sit to the side and I can beaver through things and have answers ready and respond to things. So, you know, don't let your strata manager, whether it's someone that works for Vantage or elsewhere, kind of get to a meeting and go, okay, well, we have to elect a chairperson, so Irene, you'll be the chairperson, but I'm just going to run the meeting. You know, it should be a decision.
Yeah.
Do you want to actually chair the meeting, or do you want to just satisfy the technical requirements of the Act?
Yeah. And we've had, not under your management, Chris, but we've had that exact scenario with our previous strata manager, where they're like, oh, okay, you're the chair of the committee, cool, but the employee of the strata management company
Is going to do it.
sat at the front of the room
Yeah.
and ran the entire thing.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, we're creatures of habit as well, I guess. If you've gone through your whole career and 90% of your meetings, no one wants to chair it, and you're just getting a name for the minutes, you're just used to doing it that way. I mean, my experience has been, you know, particularly in recent years, in larger, more professionally run buildings, and most of the time the chairperson there actually wants to chair the meeting and has, you know, the capability to do that. So, if there's any bad habits from Vantage people, let me know.
Chris, what do you think is an ideal committee size, or does it just depend on what?
I think 5 or 6 is ideal. The Act says that the committee has to be a minimum of 3 and up to 7, and if it's more than 7 you need to pass a special kind of resolution that allows it to be more than 7. Anything more than 7 is unwieldy, I think. You know.
I think a lot of it also, Chris, probably has to do with the quality of the people. Like you can just get 3 very quality people and they'll do the job of 7.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I think it's the quality of the people that are making, you know, that are administering and making those decisions.
Without a doubt.
It does get interesting, like getting up to 7, because if you have to have a quorum to make decisions and you've got 3, you only need 2 people there. We've got 7, so we have to have 4. And I'm just trying to think, a couple of us travel quite regularly for work. Like I know I'm not going to get the next 2 meetings. And we've got a couple of retirees who travel. And so there have been times for us where we just had to say we can't have a meeting because we won't actually have a quorum.
You won't get a quorum
We do
there.
most of our business by email, so we don't have that. We don't have that problem. So it doesn't matter. We've got one committee member who likes to disappear during winter. He gets in his 4-wheel drive and he goes out into the desert for 3 months and comes back when it's 4 months. So we do most of our stuff by email to get around that problem.
Yeah, but then again, you'll get people in the executive committee who don't want to be bothered with email continually coming through.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these issues are email after email after email. Issue.
Oh yeah.
And some people just don't want that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It's
it's-
personal.
And when it comes to like negotiating rules, like because we're a lovely community, we all went out for lunch together.
Nice.
And because we're like, this is going to take a while, we've got like quite a few rules to get through. So yeah, so we do a bit of that face-to-face stuff.
Yeah.
And some issues lend themselves to being dealt with by email, others don't. When there's a matter that needs to be, there's nuance and it needs to be debated and pulled apart, you need to get into a room with people. Where it's straightforward, there's a quote for $200 to do, put mirrors up in the basement, go ahead, that's easy, tick and flick. Interestingly though, the Act does not really give the capability for the committee to do things by email. You're meant to have a meeting to resolve everything and minute it. It's a form over substance argument, though. You know, I'd rather ask for forgiveness than permission in order to get a $200, mirror in the basement installed. You're not going to be, if you end up hauled before the tribunal, asked to account for why you didn't have a meeting and minute the installation of mirrors in the basement, you're not going to be sentenced to 20 years in the electric chair. I think you'll be okay.